Okay, let's start recording. I should have been recording this whole time. But hey, people who don't attend class, I mean, they can read the email. Okay, does that cover everything? Don't apologize. Okay, all right. This is chaos. Dude? I gotta tell you, man, I can never hear anything you're saying.
What's the code for?
Thank you. For Pear Deck? No, it's all good. I appreciate you speaking. MAQ MPJ. Okay, so sorry, MAQ MPJ. Okay. Any idea when final grades are supposed to be? Okay. Everything will be posted. I'm going to try to have everything posted before the final. Your quiz 5 grade will definitely be posted within like a day of you taking quiz 5. So you're going to know your grade several days before the final. What I'm trying to say is there is a chance that Top Hat and Packback for the final week might not be merged well in advance of the final. And so I'm just saying that it's your responsibility to know that you've done the weekly homework. Whereas something like a quiz, it's like you don't know how you did on the quiz. It's my responsibility to make sure you know. Whereas it's your responsibility to know that you're doing the homework. That's the idea. Because again, the homework is participation grade. It's not graded by me, right? Okay, so let's see. Anything else? What? This whole thing? Final grade. What does that mean? All right. Okay. Any other questions? Any old-fashioned questions with hand raising and talking? Yes. How many for quiz 5? So 3.5 approximately. Yeah. So the second half of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna make sure, like, I promise it won't be that bad. I'm not gonna have it until Monday. And yeah, they're gonna do one, like it's gonna be given to me. It's gonna be bigger than I want it to be. It won't be on anything that I don't get to. Okay, so I don't think I'm gonna get very far into 15. I might not do 15. So technically, like it's supposed to be the way it was. It's supposed to be 11 through 15. Mine's probably going to be 10 and a half to 14. That's how I'm going to do it. Okay. All right. Any other old-fashioned questions? Yes. Probably Sunday. My parents are visiting this weekend, and they leave Sunday. As soon as Sunday comes around, I'm just going to spend a bunch of hours looking at it, and hopefully, I can delegate some of it to a TA. It's kind of a weird system this semester. It's like I have 200 students, and I don't really have there's like a TA pool. I don't have it's weird. Yeah. Okay. I'm doing my best. It's a labor of love. I'm doing my best to serve you guys. I have one more question. What does that mean? What's the question? All right. Let's any other questions for real? Okay. All right. Okay, excellent. All right. By the way, please do the student evaluation of instructor. It helps me. If you like me, it hurts me if you don't like me, but it is what it is. Okay. Anyway, I thought this was kind of interesting. You think about like the complementary, like you can use the tools of economics to kind of predict this kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of complementarity between flu precautions and COVID precautions. It's kind of interesting that flu cases have plummeted from the COVID precautions we've been taking, but it kind of goes to show just how contagious COVID is, that, something that has totally knocked out the flu still isn't enough to knock out COVID. So it just goes to show how contagious coronavirus is. So I thought that's kind of interesting. Okay. This is a really good question. Is Apple more of a bundling or tying brand? I had never really thought about this from like a class standpoint with the material we're learning about. As far as tying goes, but can anybody tell me what ways Apple does tying? I think Apple is like the best at tying. So remember, tying is the idea that you sell a base good and then there's some accessory or variable good that like the only way you could use this good really is with these accessory goods that only work with this good. Yes? Speak up? Maybe. So certain apps might only be compatible with Apple iPhones. Okay. What else? The charger is a really good example, right? Because a lot of the devices you own use micro USB. Android phones use micro USB. Wireless speakers use micro USB. My headphones charge with micro USB. But Apple has never used that kind of standard. Okay, micro USB is standard for everything. Apple uses their own crazy system, right? Previously, Apple had that big bulky thing that like clipped in to the old. I used to have an iPod. I used to have iPods back in the day. Now they have like a little kind of like, I think they call it like the lightning cable or whatever. I know they use the different ones for the Mac and the iPhone. I'm not really an Apple user, but they've upgraded, they've changed their charging platforms that they use, the kind of things they use. And so, oh no, why don't I have, oh, it's because, wait a second. There we go, charging cables. You can't use micro USB like every other device. Another thing is, think about how Apple got rid of the aux port, right? They got rid of the aux port on their devices. So now, you could get wireless headphones and plug them in, but your options are now limited. What they're trying to do with getting rid of the aux port is get you to buy AirPods, right? And so that's an example of tying. Okay, it's not a malicious form of tying that's going to get them in trouble with the Department of Justice for monopoly. But Apple is excellent at tying, so they're really, really good at tying. Okay. I thought this was a funny tweet. I don't know. It's not related to what we're doing right now, but stuff we did a little while ago. Jody Beggs is a Harvard economist. She is kind of popular for making a lot of videos for undergrads to help them learn economics. And so going to the gym, watching a buff person copying everything they do, it's a non-excludable good, right? They're basically training you. They can't, what are they going to do? Stop working out? Non-excludable good, right? Okay. Anyway, so let's wrap up and review module 13, okay? So this is a weird one. Now, heads up, I would never hit you with a question on an exam that's this hard to answer. But the question is, why is the answer D? Okay, so I just want to clear this up real quick. The reason the answer is D here is because engines are inherent to the vehicle. Okay, they're just part of the automobile, right? It's part of the good. So it's like saying laptop and processor. That's not tying. The processor is inherent to the laptop, right? It's part of the laptop, okay? Whereas an iPhone that you have to buy AirPods for or a special charging cable for, it's not inherent to the iPhone. It's an accessory, right? That's tying. And so automobiles and engines are not an example of tying, okay? It's not some kind of variable good that you buy as like an accessory that you have to use, okay? It's just part of the good, okay? It's part of the base good. And so at most, I wouldn't even use this as an example of bundling, but at most it's like a bundle because you buy the engine as part of the automobile, right? Why are cell phones and phone calls an example of tying? Because before unlimited talk, you would actually pay by the minute, okay? And so you had some kind of service plan. And your phone, if you want to use it, if you want to call somebody, you're buying varying levels of minutes as you talk on the phone. Okay, that's tying. Okay. Okay, this one is something that's reasonable that you could get on an exam. So let's talk about this. We have two people, okay, David and John, and we're looking at this golf resort, okay? And they each have a willingness to pay for a one-night stay. They each have a willingness to pay for a round of golf. What's the optimal price of a bundle? Well, let's look. David's willingness to pay for the bundle, well, we just add up the willingness to pay of the two goods. He's willing to pay 50 for the stay, 80 for the golf. So he's willing to pay $130 for the bundle. What about John? John's willing to pay 110 for a night, 35 for a round. So John's willing to pay $145 for the bundle if we were to bundle the two goods. So then the question becomes, well, what would be the right price? We could set the price at 145. Then we just sell to John. So we'd make $145. We're assuming the firm has zero costs. So they're simplifying it for us, okay? So we'd make $145, setting the bundle price at 145 and just selling to John. But if we set it at 130, we could sell to both of them. And so we get $260, okay? And so the answer here is A. All right, just to be clear, the answer is A. All right. So good question. Would we always pick the lowest one? It depends on the profit, right? In this case, since David's willingness to pay is only slightly lower than John's, doubling your sales while reducing the price a little bit, you can think about that like elastic, right? It's like lowering my price from 145 to 130, but increasing my quantity sold by 100%. That's a pretty elastic demand. And so lowering the price increases my revenue. So you could do the calculation. If, let's say David were only willing to pay $10, you wouldn't want to lower the price to 10 because then you'd only make 20. So you'd still have to compare, okay? Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So this is like a reasonable question for an exam, okay? Okay. Okay, one more. Bundling can increase efficiency, especially when, so let's just talk about the logic of this. Best examples of bundling: Netflix, Spotify, Hulu, Disney Plus. Streaming services are the best example of bundling. What do they have? They have a bundle of tons of things you can listen to or watch. What's their marginal cost of providing another? Because what's the service? They sell access to their platform. What's the marginal cost to them? Zero? A penny? Right, what's the cost to, the cost to the pizza shop of selling you a pizza is the cost it makes to, make the pizza. But the cost of Netflix, the cost to Netflix of selling you another subscription is basically zero. Where are all their costs? It's their fixed costs. It's the cost they pay. It's the yearly they have to continue to renew the rights, right? They buy rights to things. So Netflix is spending hundreds of millions of dollars for rights to stream shows and movies, right? That's a fixed cost. So they're same as Spotify. It's like Spotify has fixed costs, but very low marginal costs. So fixed costs are high and marginal costs are low is a really good reason to bundle things. Okay. Another idea, why is bundling efficient? If fixed costs are high, remember, fixed costs are fixed. So the more you sell, the more your average fixed cost decreases. Think back to the graphing assignment. If you did your average fixed cost correctly, it would have been the day you were born. So I was born on the 28th. My average fixed cost would have been 28 divided by the quantity. So the more quantity I sell, the lower and lower my average fixed cost gets. So if most of my total cost is from the fixed costs, like is the case with Netflix, and my variable costs are almost zero because, you know, the cost of providing more services is really low, then selling to more and more and more and more people is making it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for me to run my business. So bundling increases efficiency when fixed costs are high because we're spreading those fixed costs among more and more consumers. That's my little review wrap up of module 13. Let me make sure that everybody feels good. What's a good one? Let's, you know, there's nothing wrong with, how's everybody doing? Let's take a second. How are y'all? It's almost the end of the semester. It's been a stressful time for everybody, right? You know, a lot of chaos in the world, a lot of trouble with COVID, you know. Well, you know, whoever the person is who's, you know, over there in 8 or 9, you know, if you need, you know, if you ever need to talk, if you ever need, you know, help with something, or, you know, you're having serious issues and you need an accommodation with any of the work you're doing, you know, maybe something, you know, if you're going through something serious and for some reason you need an extension on something, you know, please just email me and we'll work something out. Okay. You know, I can't, you know, I'm not going to single that person out, but if you need, you know, any help with anything, please just shoot me an email. We'll talk about it. Okay. Okay. For the rest of you in the middle, again, you know, same thing applies, right? You know, you guys know that I'm pretty lenient with stuff. So, you know, if you're having, you know, if you need help with anything, please just email me, explain your situation. We'll work something out. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. One more prompt. Let me just see any questions. So I'll just put a text prompt. Is this it is. Any questions about anything I just went over? Okay. It's just kind of a wrap up module 13. Okay. So why does Netflix have high fixed costs, for example? If, you know, elaborate on your question if I'm not answering it correctly. But why does Netflix have high fixed costs? Well, it's because, from the last question. So again, so think about Netflix. It has high fixed costs because it pays a lot of money, regardless of how many subscriptions it sells. It has a high fixed cost in the rights to the shows it provides. Okay. So that's not a variable cost because variable costs are based on, you know, how much stuff you're selling. Okay. Whether Netflix has 1 subscriber or 1 million, it's still paying a big chunk of its money to get those rights. So why high fixed cost again? So again, imagine that the biggest chunk of your costs are fixed. So most of your average total cost is from average fixed cost. And so the more quantity you sell, the more people you sell to, the smaller and smaller you're making your average total cost, because your average total cost is basically just average fixed cost. Netflix doesn't really have variable costs in this context, very low variable costs. So the more units you sell, the more subscriptions you sell, the more you're spreading out those fixed costs. So that $100 million you spent to get the rights to all those movies, if you sell 1 subscription, the average cost is 100 million. But if you sell 100 million subscriptions, the average cost is $1, right? So that's the idea. Anything else? See, this person's just playing with me. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so I'm probably going to let you go kind of early today. I just want to introduce you to taxes and subsidies real quick. Okay. So the first thing I want you to think about is how costs get passed, or benefits get passed on to consumers. Okay. So imagine a scenario where a new process makes laptops much cheaper to produce. okay? And, this is obviously going to make laptops cheaper for consumers. What do we know about supply and demand? We know from earlier in the semester that if you make something cheaper to produce, new technology makes it cheaper to produce. Graphically, we shift our supply curve to the right. We call that an increase in supply. And generally speaking, we'd expect the equilibrium price to fall, right? Increased supply, equilibrium price falls. But the degree to which the equilibrium price falls depends on elasticities. So if demand is very inelastic, let's say there's a new process for making tires, okay? Now we can look at these, we can look at these shifts in supply, they're identical. They're identical shifts, okay? So let's say we're looking at the market for tires, not a specific brand of tires, just tires in general. Pretty inelastic, everybody needs tires, okay? If they become a lot cheaper to produce, we would expect a strong reduction in the equilibrium price because demand is inelastic. Buyers react very little to changes in price. So you would see a large reduction in price. Now, the intuition may be a little hard to get, but if you draw it, you can see it. So some kind of cost-saving production method is going to have a much larger reduction in price for inelastic demand. What about the same cost-saving method, but let's say it's the market for a specific brand of potato chips? Well, that's pretty elastic demand. We wouldn't expect the price to fall very much, okay? We'd expect the price to fall very little and quantity to increase very much. So again, it might take a while to get the intuition for this kind of stuff. When in doubt, draw it out, graph it out. More vertical, inelastic demand, that shift in supply causes the price to fall a lot. More horizontal, flatter, elastic demand, that shift in supply barely changes the price. So that's the idea. The same goes for the opposite. If something happens to supply that makes it a lot more expensive to produce something and demand is inelastic, we expect the price to go up a lot. Okay? Maybe that's a little more intuitive. Okay? Because if demand is inelastic, sellers can get away with raising their price a lot more than they could if demand were elastic. So something that reduces the supply, damages the supply chain, that's like the drought on the farm, right? We'd see the price go up a lot. But if demand is very elastic, the price barely goes up. Okay? So now applying that, this is how we're going to start thinking about the way taxes affect prices. So the first thing to know about taxes, you probably already know this, that there are trade-offs, right? They fund government programs and infrastructure. But at the same time, they also, and we're going to talk about this, they reduce quantities exchanged in markets. They distort markets, right? They discourage market activity, okay? So there are trade-offs with taxes. The one we're going to focus on most is called excise tax. Excise tax is a per unit tax on a good or a service. So for example, sales tax is like a per unit tax. Now again, sales tax is really, 6 cents on the dollar, right? It's not really per unit. But the way I want you to think about excise taxes is taxes on goods as they're being bought or sold. Unlike income tax, which is a tax on your income, unlike a lump sum tax, which is like pay $500 to the city or something like that. I want you to think of excise taxes as like taxes on goods as they're being bought or produced, okay? That's the bottom line. All right. So as far as excise taxes, I want you to understand that taxes cause changes in supply and demand. The extent to which they change prices is going to depend on elasticities. The thing we're going to focus on the most is called tax incidence. Who bears the burden of the tax? That's the key question. Who bears the burden? It doesn't matter whether we place the tax on the buyers or sellers. So this is key. This is something that, this is one of those things that people who don't attend or who don't attend but also don't read or watch the lectures, they're going to mess this up. So pay attention here. It doesn't matter who we tax, buyers or sellers, when we're determining who ultimately pays the tax. It doesn't matter who we tax. What matters is the relative elasticities. Now, again, when we talk about elasticity, there's like 4 different ways to say it, right? So if buyers are more elastic than sellers, that's the same thing as sellers being more inelastic than buyers, right? So again, this is something where it can be said several different ways, right? If buyers are more elastic than sellers, sellers bear the higher burden. If sellers are more elastic than buyers, buyers bear the higher burden. Now, once the note-taking types have that written down, I'm going to show you a quick example of something that may seem counterintuitive, might clear this up a little, and then I'm going to let you go. So let me I'm going to switch to the doc cam and draw a picture for you. Any questions before I do that? I'll open that up for a sec. Well, I'll keep the prompt open if anybody wants to ask any questions. I'm going to switch to the doc cam up here, but I can still see if anybody asks, if anybody types up a question at any point through the Pear Deck prompt, I can still see it on my screen. So here we go. Come on. There we go. Okay. I'm going to switch screen share to the doc cam. I'll keep this open. So remember, it's not, so just to be clear, we don't call it price burden. We call it tax burden or tax. Somebody said it, price burden. It's tax incidence or tax burden. We're usually going to call it tax incidence. But whoever's asking this question, price burden is supply demand question mark. I don't know what you mean. Can you please elaborate? Maybe reword that because I don't understand your question. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say that demand is very inelastic. So, maybe this is the demand for gasoline, right? And let's say supply is relatively elastic. Now, let's tax the sellers. I'm going to show you that even though we're going to tax the sellers, most of the burden, the incidence of the tax, is going to fall on the buyers because they're more inelastic or less elastic. Now watch this. What we do is we draw a second curve. We shift it. you can think of this as a leftward shift because that's what it is. If we tax the sellers, we're making it more expensive to produce. We're taxing them for production. So it's a leftward shift. But I want you to start thinking of it more like a vertical shift. It's still left, but it's also vertical. Okay, it's left and up, right? Here's supply with the tax. So now the vertical, imagine, so first, I'm not trying to say that these are different elasticities. Assume that the supply curves here are parallel. I just can't draw them perfectly. So the supply curves are parallel, okay? Supply is elastic, demand is inelastic. The original equilibrium, as we can see, was Q star and P star. So this market at equilibrium, buyers pay P star, sellers receive P star, right? There's no in between. There's no tax. I pay you $5, you get $5. Now, the new price that buyers pay is up here. We'll call it PB. And here's a quantity. But remember, the vertical distance between the supply curves is the tax. So buyers pay PB, but again, tax is that vertical distance. Buyers pay PB, but sellers receive, I drew things a little tight here, my apologies. Sellers receive PS because they have to pay there's a tax, right? We notice. What do we notice? So again, this is the tax as well, right? Theoretically, again, I can't draw perfectly. The distance between the price the buyers pay and the price the sellers receive is the same as this. So I'll write that out. So PB minus PS equals tax, right? What do we notice? The price the sellers receive is only slightly lower than the price they originally received, P star. But the price the buyers pay is much higher than the price they originally paid. Okay, so to be clear, before tax, PB equals PS equals P star. Right, I want to make that clear. What that means is that before the tax, the price I pay as the buyer is the price you receive as the seller. Now with the tax, PB is much higher than P star, but PS is only slightly below P star. So now why is that the case? So what am I trying to say here? Most of the burden of the tax, most of the incidence of the tax is on the buyers. Even though we put it on the sellers are barely making less money. They're receiving only a little bit less than they originally did, but buyers are paying a lot more than they originally did. That's the key here. So buyers bear most of the burden of this tax because buyers are less elastic. It didn't matter that we taxed the sellers. Most of the cost of the tax got passed on to the buyers. That is the key observation here. And that's where I'll end it today. So enjoy your weekends. Please do something fun. Relax. All right. I'll see you on Monday.